Right, whilst that's drying, what I'm actually going to do, because this is probably going to be the end of the night's painting session for me, so I'm just going to run around the bases with my normal basing colour, which is an English uniform. And the reason I'm doing that is I can still hold the weapons quite nicely, but I don't want to touch the armour yet whilst it's drying. But I do find that putting this base coat on really helps to sort of start bringing the figures to life. And it sort of helps to really shape the rest of the painting. So I don't mind doing it now, even though I haven't painted some of the shoes or anything like that, because I'm trying to leave a little bit of an edge around the figure itself, sorry, around the feet and shoes themselves. But I don't know what you'll think on the video, but for me, this is one of those things that really just tidies things up nicely. And we start to see the real figure. I quite like that sort of burnt edge bit, so I try and leave that wherever I can on these Test of Honor figures anyway. So I'm going to go up to the edge, but not try and go over the edge. If you do go over the edge, just roll around it with your fingers like that, and you'll be able to take it off. Or paint all the way around if that's your preference. So yeah, I mean, I don't know what you think, but it just starts to put some consistency around the figure, some definition. So I'm going to carry on doing that. Then I'll let them dry overnight and join you tomorrow. Okay, so to make up for my laziness in not painting that black undercoat, primer as much as I should have done and checking it, I'm now in the situation where I'm going to apply some black wash to try and sink into those recesses and get the model to show the sort of definition that I'm after. It's a little bit of the black ink into the pot. I'm not going to use quite as precise a brush, but we still don't want to go too crazy when we're doing this. And I'm just trying to make sure that we get the differentiation that I'm after. And if you've ever seen samurai armour that's black, it is pretty black. Not really greys kicking around. And even though this is a single piece up here, like a single piece forged single piece of armour, we're just going to try and do that quickly. Again, it doesn't matter if we go into that armpit recess, it's just going to help with the definition. Okay, so we're just going to leave that for no other reason than it feels right. I'm going to leave that one in a sort of position like that so that it doesn't run down the legs too much. Similar with this one. Pick up some of this surplus here. So you get the idea. This is just, as I say, me repairing, having done it a bit lazy in the first place. And if you do cut too many corners, sometimes you either come unstuck and have to redo it, or you end up with a lesser result than you're after. I think when people talk about speed painting, for me, the best approach is to find a style that you like and that suits your abilities and suits your sort of views on how you like your figures to be presented, and then stick to it and practice it. And you'll certainly be quicker that way than trying out lots of newfangled techniques that potentially don't offer you anything. However, I do think your painting does mature over time. So projects like this are a perfect opportunity to try something new because it's not like you're ruining a whole army, if you see what I mean. So, you know, maybe I'll like the effect of doing what I've done with a bit of black ink better than perhaps priming it correctly in the first place. So sometimes you get to sort of learn new tricks, as it were. I'm just not particularly pleased with the fact that it's taken me a bit longer than I'd planned. As I said, we're up against the clock on this one. And actually, obviously now I've made myself life more difficult for myself, because I've had to go back in and start overpainting areas that I've painted, and we'll have to await the outcome, as it were, in terms of how good that looks. Just putting that off camera. As I said, lie them down. I don't know why I'm doing that particularly, but it just feels right this morning. So only a couple more to do, but you get the idea, and then we'll come back once they're dry. So whilst that ink is drying, just thought I'd point out that obviously look at the basing now that we've done it, in terms of giving you that consistency of appearance straight away by just painting the base. It tidies up all of that sort of overrun. What I'm going to just move on to do now quickly is use the moss colour that I've got in mind for the tunic, or sorry, for the surcoat on this particular model down here. So we'll give that a bit of a shake, and I'm going to do a little bit of a cheat on this one and just use the actually no, I'm not. I was going to say I'm going to use the lid, but that really hasn't mixed very well. So we'll get a paint stirrer, we'll get that going, and we'll grab another pot to put this in. I think this could be nearing the end actually of this particular batch of Foundry moss paint. And I do that, and obviously, like most things that you buy in sets, you quite often find yourself using one colour over another. So I'll be probably just purchasing a replacement on its own. But let's grab a more detailed brush, and let's start getting the surcoat done on this one. Again, I'm holding it at a slight angle, and moss really doesn't lighten up too much or look, should we say, expensive, which is the look I'm going for, until we start getting some of the lighter colours on. But this base coat typically provides good coverage. What we want to do is just make sure that any areas that I didn't prime thoroughly enough are covered. If you can, leave a slight little line where you've got like a fold like this, but sometimes it's nigh on impossible, and don't worry about it too much, because that's the whole point of the sort of triad system, is you get to come and lighten that up later on. Again, the more I look at these figures, the more annoyed I am at myself for not priming them as well as I should have done, because there's areas on here that are very loosely covered, shall we say, with the primer, and it would have been a much nicer finish had I just taken the trouble to do a second coat. And the short sword sort of tucks through that surcoat. Haven't entirely thought about how I'm going to make this look more expensive, other than I'm going to put some patterning on the edges, and then hopefully that will lift it enough to get a result that I'm happy with. This is a prime area, this sort of armpit area, where leaving a thin line of the black is probably more desirable than trying to flood the paint in there, because all it will do is it will leak into your uniform or shirt colour, and you'll be painting that again too. You notice I've just gone over that section there. Sometimes I mean that's a real error, but what we'll do is we'll leave that, because if I can't really get anything in there to get that off, but I will try just taking another brush and removing it. Okay, not too many dramas with that one. So that sort of thing does happen. Deal with it quickly if you can. If not, just commit yourself to an overpaint. So we're now getting like a 3-colour sort of model for this one, and that's probably as much as I want to do with that colour. What I'm going to do next is just pick up the lighter colour that the original grey-green for these, green-grey, and then we'll start looking at this one's armour. But I'll leave that one to dry to one side for a moment. Join me again shortly. Right, so I've just popped a little bit of the grey-green in here. And what I'm trying to do at this stage, I'll just move that one out of the way a minute, is I'm trying to work out whether by darkening it in the first instance I've created enough definition to give me the ability to sort of highlight this one. Sorry, not highlight, but bring out the raised surfaces. So let's have a little look at what that looks like on this base figure. And again, what we're trying to do is gently run that over the edge. I'm not sure how that's looking on the camera, but actually to the naked eye, that's not too bad. That's actually quite a decent difference between the colours. You want it to look blended, but not too stark, and not too stark. But also, you want enough differentiation that it does accent the raised parts of the sculpture. So, I'm just going to lightly run down these. And this is a good opportunity to cover up any crimes that you may have committed, like me, in not undercoating it properly and then not base coating it properly. And sometimes, if you're happy with the result, you don't need a highlight, or if you do, it'll be a very light highlight process. And again, this one for you about how you like your figures to be presented and how much trouble, how much effort you want to go to justify that effect. And again, sometimes people, well, my opinion is you tend to put more effort into these smaller units because you can. And as I said, normally this would get a lot more attention, but I'm just trying to get them tabletop ready in short order. What I'll probably do is give you guys an overview at least of the game that we play Test of Honor wise. And it's got some really interesting mechanisms in it, not least of which is just a really simple way of being unsure about who goes next, and indeed whether you get some of your figures or units to move at all. And that's simply achieved by having 3 counters placed into the bag. So it's a bit like bolt action in terms of you draw a counter to determine who goes next. It's a little bit more sophisticated because it differentiates between different types of troops. But if you draw 3 fate tokens, that's the end of the turn, even if there's other counters left in the bag. And I really like that. I don't think anyone commanding any force, how big or small, can guarantee that they're going to get to move or get to do something. And in fact, I've just bought myself 3 black dice for bolt action that I can put into the bag and operate on the same principle, which I think will make the games a little bit more interesting, and certainly less predictable. Apologies, this is taking a little bit of time, but I said this one's the one with the most amount of coverage in terms of the under that original colour. And just to remind you, that's a an 886 green grey that I darkened originally to get us this base coat. And what you're trying to do is do two things here. Pick out the highlighted raised parts on the actual sculpture itself, but then also trying to have a little think about how that would play out in areas where perhaps the sculpting hasn't been as kind. And I suppose number 3 out of my 2 is just to get an effect that looks credible, looks realistic, rather than one that you might think just follows every single line on the model, because you can end up with a bit of a sort of zebra effect if you're not too careful. Okay. All right. I don't know what that's looking like on camera, but not too shabby. I think this one will need a highlight just in certain areas. But yeah, this could provide a nice little effect. So what I'm going to do is run around the other lower class troops and then join you shortly. Okay, so that's dried, and I don't know if you can see that clearly on the camera, but I'm getting a nice little bit of recessed blacking going on there. Got a little bit of poor coverage there, but we've got a subtle differentiation now between this sort of inner sections of the armour and the bits that are obviously more visible, prouder of the surface. So what I'm going to do now is mix up a bit of paint somewhere between the 2 that I started with, which is this colour here. And it's always a good tip to keep the colour mix nearby so that I can then mix next to it and try and get something that's lighter but not sort of crazily light. So I'm just going to do that off camera. See you shortly. So just as a reminder, I've mixed up there the charcoal 34C from Foundry alongside the original black grey that I had from Vallejo. And the trick now is that, as you can see, we've got a very grey looking colour. So what I'm going to try and do is just lightly accentuate these raised areas on the armour, and I just tend to drag it along the top very lightly, because we want to get the impression that this is highlighting black armour, not making it grey, if that makes sense. So we're just picking out some of those raised details. If I've got any sort of areas like that where we've got a distinctly prominent bit, do that. Get the edges done. And in fact, concentrating on the edges is not a bad shout because of what we're doing. Okay, and do you know what? That's probably enough for this figure, as in that sort of depth coverage that we're achieving. I don't want these to look too fancy, if you see what I mean, too wealthy. So a slightly worn effect is definitely preferable. And I'm not doing too much underneath where we don't see, just enough to know that if someone casually picked up the figure, that would show. Now, in terms of around the body, that's fine. What do we do about these plates? Well, again, what we're trying to do really is make sure we don't conflict with the lacing that we can see. We do want to just put couple of little highlights on. I've just done that one because it was a bit white, not because I want to go over the lacing. Just run down the edges. Actually, putting the black wash on perhaps has been a good idea here, because it's helped create the depth and lift the remainder without me doing a great deal on here. Okay. So not too bad in this. Quite often on the samurai armor, there's the bottom section. This is a much larger plate, so if you can even just get on the edge of that, you'll end up with a better finish. So, okay, so look what it looks like on camera. I'm not sure if you followed that, but basically I've just lightly gone around there now, so I can see a proper differentiation between the armor and the inner plating, as it were. Nice. Okay, so I'm going to just subtly do that to all the other figures in the same way and join you shortly. Okay, so those are drying. Now back front and center will be the two leader figures. We'll try and make some progress on those. I don't know if I mentioned it a minute ago, but I've enlisted the aid of a hairdryer because what we might do is just to speed up the process, because I've now got 2 hours and I really want these guys ready for the tabletop. And the only way we're going to do that is by accelerating the process a little bit. So what I'm going to do now, you can see that's still a little bit wet, the moss from earlier. So I'm going to dry that using the hairdryer and then paint the second coat on both the armour and the moss. But I'm going to try and dry this off first so that I don't knock it when I'm painting it. So the Foundry Teal mid-range, mid-coat is that sort of colour. So distinctly different kind of tone to that one that we've just done on the main armour for the figure. So I'm just going to give this one a stir, because again this is one I've not really used much at all for obvious reasons, and it's probably needs a little bit of help out the tin, shall we say. Again, I don't mind it being a little bit thick. We're going to get good coverage that way, but also we're not going to run into the gaps, into the recesses too much. We're just going to be able to stay proud of it. So let's give this a go. And I'm going to do a little bit more on this front than I did previously. Sorry, on the other armour, because I'm quite happy to get the more distinct contrast between the undercoat / primer and then this top armour. Leave a couple of sections recessed, maybe just to show what's occurring, and then if you can get the edges of the armour here. I can see some lacing in there, but we'll come and deal with that shortly, because there's quite a lot of the armour in many ways, fortunately, is obscured by this surcoat. But I can just see the little tags of the lacing through it, so we will have to dot those in. And again, make sure that bottom plate is well covered. Get the edges. And then we're going to struggle to do much here with the lacing, so just a little bit of a lightening on the armour is fine. So this is quite a bold colour, and maybe not one that I'd use for a regular army, but it's certainly not, you know, completely implausible from a historical perspective. There we go. Okay. Now the helmet again. Just try and get some of these sections highlighted, particularly on the edge. And when it comes to the helmet, you'll see that there's some little strips across here. What I'm going to try and do is very gently pick those out. Leaving obviously the base coat as much as possible undisturbed. Yeah, not too bad. The rest of this is going to be lacing, as I mentioned, but these bits here, just use a little bit of a light, really light touch, just to get that impression that got a bit of light striking the upper edge. Excellent. Around there. I can sort of get in at these ones here, that's fine. Cool, right. And then on the brim there, around the edges. As I said, these turn pieces were normally decorated, and I may come back and do those later, but at least if I paint them now and decide for the reasons of speed to ignore it, it looks covered, as it were. Okay, so I'm not sure how that's doing on the camera, but you get the general feeling that we're now really starting to lighten up the figure, which is great. Again, I'll put him to one side a moment. I probably should have done his clothing first, actually, before doing that, but we won't omit. We'll do that properly for this guy here. So remember, this guy's had a storm blue coat painted on. So we'll go to the next one in the triad, but I'll just clean the brush. I do use a brush soap, but I tend to use that towards the end of a painting session a couple of times, and certainly when I finish painting for the night or for the day, we'll definitely do it then. I'm going to cheat with the storm blue and just use it straight out the lid. As I say, not essential, but probably recommend that you do this before you do the armour. Continuing the whole inside out theme. This is ending up looking pretty grey, but not to worry. The more vibrant colour from the terracotta is going to take effect in a moment. Apologies, I didn't mean for this to be a almost near real-time video, but I think sometimes it's helpful just to carry on so that people see the full process rather than these short sort of bursts that you tend to get from instructional videos, only because I don't know, I think A, it's more realistic and more helpful when you see the detail of what's going on, but also when you're sort of thinking about timing and what effort you need to put in. I think sometimes the sort of summary videos give a pretty misleading representation, and I'm pleased with the work I've done there, just to highlight that out. It may not be so much on screen, but we are going to go back round shortly with a highlight for storm blue. I think that is an absolute essential, and this is where you start to see the blue effect. At the moment, all we've got is grey, but we are sort of building to that point. So what I'll do is I'll do the same thing for the Foundry Royal Purple that I used on that sort of clothing and cloth colour there, and we'll do that. Again, a bit of a cheat because I know this paint quite well, and I know I can get away with using it straight out of the lid. And this one's quite good in that you'll see the lifting effect almost straight away with this one. because there is quite a differentiation between this one and the base coat. It's probably one of my more favoured triads, but the opportunities for using it are fairly limited. So it's nice to have the opportunity to do so. Now, in reality, there would be quite a lot of patterning on most Japanese clothing, and I would be giving that a go. But still, I would probably still do what I'm doing at the moment, and then I would try a few designs around it. Now, the reason it's quite challenging is a lot of the patterns were quite dense, and therefore, on this sort of scale of miniature, not particularly easy to pick out or distinct. But also, because there's a lot of cloth folds and clothing, recesses. Again, that would be quite challenging to sort of bring out on a miniature. So I'm going to do my patterning on this leading edge here, and then if I think that's lifted the figure enough, probably stop at that point. But you can use a mixture of little dots, the occasional sort of cross, if you see what I mean, like a tiny little cross, just enough to differentiate it. If you want to go for something more complicated, depending on the type of colour that you've got, you can put like a circle and then a little dot within that circle, almost like a flower representation. So anyway, what I'm keen for you guys to see is I'm keen for you to see the effect of the terracotta on this figure here, because this may make or break the presentation of the figure, as it were. This one I'm going to properly sort of mix up because it's not as forgiving as the purple. But it's still a good coverer nevertheless. So you can see it's a little bit runnier. And this is the splitting I'm talking about. That is the bane of my life with these foundry paints. So much so that I bought some spare lids. And the fact that foundry sell them tells me that they know that it's a problem too. So again, I think the real answer would be to decant them into the dropper bottles, which you can buy as spares, if you see what I mean. So again, this one's a little bit easier because we can run down in the gaps subtly between the armour, sorry, between the lacing and actually hit the armour, as it were. And if you're light enough with the brush will do the work for you, because it will catch on those upper pieces and not sink into the recess. Okay. Okay. So not too bad. Just get that top bit up here. And obviously try and pick out the banding on this main body part, main body piece. You'll notice I'm not trying to be completely precise about this. Again, you've got to remember the scale of the miniature, the distance that it's being viewed at, and the fact that you can make things look a lot worse by not having enough differentiation. But this is where your time goes on a samurai army and samurai figures in general. And I think this is what puts a lot of people off. But once you've done it, the figures can look so much more impressive that I think it's worth the effort personally. So here I'm just trying to go around the edges initially, and then putting a stripe down the middle. Same with the gauntlet, just leaving a little section in the middle there to try and reinforce the depth. These figures lack the sashimono or banner that was placed in the rear of some samurai figures. I suspect that's because these guys are supposed to be bandits. They probably don't have too many allegiances, and they perhaps don't have the sort of family heraldry or history to draw upon. So in another video I'll deal with how to tackle painting those for samurai. But like most things, you know, the more effort you put in, the more control that you put in, the more practice you have, the better the end result is going to be. So we're already starting to create, I think, a nice looking miniature here. Don't want to repeat going over too much of this. It's just going to have a little break there. So I'll carry on doing these now. Give my hands a little bit of a rest because I'm holding it at a slightly odd angle. Finish off the figure in the same way that I've done the other ones, and we'll take a look at the next stage.